Investing can be one of the simplest ways for Gen Zs to become millionaires. But here's the catch. The longer you wait, the tougher it gets. That's why 21-year-old Jacey Saige isn't wasting any time. She started investing at just 18 years old and is already charting her path to seven-figure status. And if you want to follow in her footsteps, you're in luck. Jacey's here with her survival guide for new investors so you can hit the ground running. It's time to take control of your financial future. You're watching Inside Investing. Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Inside Investing, the show that helps you level up your financial knowledge and sharpen your investing skills. Presented to you by TD Direct Investing, named Canada's best online brokerage by the Globe and Mail for 3 straight years and counting. I'm your host, Rob Moise, and I can only wish I was as wise in my younger years as today's guest. She is laying the groundwork for a rich financial future, and best of all, her approach is easy for beginners to understand and follow. So, let's hear all about it. Joining us is Jacey Saige, a DIY investor and financial content creator. Jacey, it is wonderful to have you on the program. Thank you for taking the time.
Of course, I'm excited about our talk today.
Yeah, and we're going to get all into your survival guide for new investors. But before we get into that, I think we got to take a moment to talk about you a little bit because you're doing something pretty darn incredible, and that's investing when people don't even have it on their radar, and certainly I didn't. What inspired you to get investing so early in life?
Well, I was lucky enough to form a really formative conviction early on. Long before I understood investing in any technical sense, when I was a teenager, there was this private arts high school that I really wanted to attend, but my parents couldn't afford it. So in my very naive, completely financially illiterate teenage brain, I thought, okay, I'll just pay for it myself. So I picked up a minimum wage job, doubled my shifts. I worked every hour that I was in school. And pretty quickly, reality hit. This was not sustainable. I could not trade every ounce of my time for money and still build the life I wanted. And that was the first moment that I realized that if I wanted access to these opportunities like this, I was going to have to be smarter with my money, not just work harder. So I asked myself a question. How can a teenage girl make more than minimum wage where I lived? I took one skill that I already had, social media, and started freelancing as a social media manager. That shift alone completely changed my relationship with money. And so for the first time, I saw income as something that didn't have to be capped by hours. Then, sophomore year of high school, I had to choose between AP Biology or a class called Business in the Arts. And the only thing I knew was that Business in the Arts didn't have a final. So, done deal, I took that class. And that class introduced me to credit cards, the stock market, index funds, and compound interest. So for the first time, money started to feel like a system that I could understand and participate in, and not just something that dictated my limits. So to answer your question, I got the confidence to start investing before I knew everything because I worked incredibly hard at a very young age so that money wouldn't be a barrier to the life I wanted, and I formed a conviction. I will never let money be the barrier to entry again.
I love it. It's all really empowering language, and you've got these goals in mind at such an early age that is just going to serve you so well in the future. It's a shame that more people don't have access to that kind of great financial education that you got through the private school that you went to, but you're sort of giving it back, as it were, because you're trying to help educate others as well with all this knowledge that you've acquired, both through schooling and obviously on your own as well, through financial literacy content. So, take us through why it was so important for you to sort of give back to your peers in a lot of senses.
Well, when I started sharing what I learned, I realized that it wasn't actually that complex. And also, personal finance and investing basics aren't taught in school. So my generation is going to naturally turn to social media. And like you said, I was fortunate enough to attend that private high school that did a really good job teaching financial literacy to me. And I want to pass that on to others so that they can benefit from it. There are also there are opinions everywhere. People are going to tell you what to do with your money before you even know how your money works. And because of that, I think it's really important for me to share with my peers just like the definitions and the facts in a language that we understand. And I also share what I am doing to give some sort of an understanding of what a 20-something-year-old could invest.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get all into how you're making it happen for yourself here. And like you say, it doesn't have to be nearly as complicated as I think a lot of people imagine it to be. So kudos to you for having the courage to start investing so early and take control of your finances early in life. Of course, intimidating for newbies, but hopefully your experience is going to help them get over some of those fears. So let's get into your survival guide for Gen Z investors looking to get started. For those in our audience, I'm sure you have 1,000,001 questions. If you're looking to get started investing, we want to hear them. Make sure you submit them to us. If you're watching on Webworker, you can use the questions box that we have. If you're on 24, our broadcast platform, it's the questions and comments box. And if you're watching our YouTube live stream, you can follow the link in the description. It's going to take you over to the broadcast platform, and that's where you can answer or ask your question rather. And we'll try to answer as many as we can. Okay, JC, so let's get down to business here. And I think it would be helpful to just let's maybe start with like the big picture, the bird's eye view of how you're actually investing today. So like take us through what that process looks like for you.
Yeah, so step one is to open an account, and there are so many good options. So what I like to recommend is go to your parents or maybe an older sibling and ask them what brokerage do they like to use, because the chances are you'll like to use them as well. And I personally get really overwhelmed with website interfaces. I can't find the buttons. I've lost my way from getting the email code on my phone, putting it in my computer. I'm frustrated. I've stopped before I've even started. So I literally just call them. I just call them up and I say, hey, where's the start button? The first few times I bought something, I had to call my brokerage just to do the same thing. And it's literally their job. It's literally their job to walk you through opening an account, linking your bank account, how to transfer money, where to type in the ticker symbol. So I started investing with about $100 a month into a couple of mutual funds. One or two being S&P 500 index or a total world stock market from ages 18 to 20. And I did this because mutual funds and ETFs have a low risk benefit of diversification. And I really liked mutual funds because I was able to set up automatic contributions each month. That way I didn't have to remember to invest. It was just kind of happening for me automatically, which made it very simple. And then I stopped regularly investing at about 20 years old because I didn't have that reoccurring income as a college student. So now I invest whenever I have the money from part-time jobs or gig work. And I invest in some ETFs and some CDs, and I hold a US technology stock ETF, a real estate ETF, and my current goal is to reach 50,000 in my portfolio.
It's fantastic that you have a goal so early, because I remember when I eventually started investing, it was like, what do you want to do with your money? The person at the bank told me, and I just said, like, I don't know, like make money, like create wealth. Like I don't really have a goal, but here you are, you have a specific goal, and that's going to help keep you on the straight and narrow. So it seems like it's a pretty simple process once you get going, but of course, it does take a little bit of, getting there before it kind of becomes second nature. There was probably some terms in there that you threw out that are maybe making newbies scratch their head, maybe a little bit anxious. So maybe just take us through this first point in your survival guide, and that's like, don't fall down a rabbit hole of financial jargon. Just focus on the essentials. Why do you think that's so important?
First things first, you definitely do not need to be an expert to start investing. Do not wait until you know everything. Wait until you know enough, and we'll go over what is enough. That's true of almost anything in life. You don't need to be an expert at a sport to start, and you don't need to be an expert painter to start painting. In fact, you actually can't really be good at either of those without trying first. I just jumped in with the money I had available, and I told myself, listen, JC, if investing is inevitable, and it kind of is inevitable, I'd rather mess this up now and learn now than wait 10 years and be 10 years behind. And there are also a lot of niche terms and concepts that aren't actually that relevant to the everyday investor. So just focus on the essential terms to understand enough about how the stock market works and enough to be able to choose the investments that you want to buy. In my opinion, the key terms you need to know are stocks, ETFs, indices, and diversification.
Okay, so walk us through those key concepts then. What's the difference between a stock, an ETF, an index, all that good stuff?
Absolutely. So a stock is a tiny, tiny part ownership of a company. You might be asking, what would a 20-something want to do with that? A couple of things, but the main reason an investor like me wants a tiny part ownership of a company is because the value goes up on its own without me really doing anything. Stock prices tend to go up when a company's business performs well and down when it doesn't. So I want that stock, not necessarily because I know the company or I use the company's product, but because I want to buy it now for $10 and sell it later when it hopefully goes up. A literal stock definition is a small ownership in a company, but a more applicable definition, which is really what we're asking here, is a stock is an intangible ownership that is bought on the hopes or opinion that its monetary value will go up later. Next is index. These are really, really simple. It actually like hurts my brain when someone tries to overcomplicate an index with jargon. An index is a list. For example, the S&P 500 index is a list of the 500 largest publicly traded companies in the US. And you can find an index list of anything. There's technology indexes, property indexes, and the list that is an index is subject to change, and the criteria to get on the list can change, but boiled down, it's really just a list of stocks or other investments. Now we can take my definition of stocks and indexes and put them together, and an ETF is born. You might be thinking, okay, stocks, indexes, where do I put my card? Because I would much rather invest in the top 10 tech companies than betting all my money on one tech company. And you can do that through buying an ETF. An ETF takes an index list, puts it in a basket, kind of shakes it up a bit, and gives you an evenly distributed slice. So when I want to buy, say, the S&P 500 index, I go and find it in the form of an ETF because I don't have the time or money to buy all 500 stocks individually.
I think that's a fantastic, just plain language look at how some of these concepts work. And it really is just that simple. Stock equals individual company. Index, a measurement of a bunch of individual companies. ETF, a basket of all those individual companies under one roof. Like, I love the plain language approach. It makes it really accessible. You mentioned one that we didn't cover right now, and that's diversification. And I think this is a concept that's intuitive to a lot of people, but maybe just lay out what diversification is and why it's so important when you are investing.
Diversification is number one tool when you're starting out to contain your potential losses. Diversification means spreading out your money into different investments, and this helps you reduce the chance of poor returns in your portfolio. Basically, do not put all your eggs in one basket. An ETF is one investment that can help you with that, because when you buy an ETF, it's one investment that puts your fingers in so many stocks that it evens out the volatility or the outliers. And I like to say that you can diversify through format of investment, meaning like a stock versus a bond, or you can diversify through item, meaning investing in land or AI or the agriculture sector of a company or of a country.
Yeah, don't put all your eggs in one basket thing, like that's another intuitive, like plain language thing that I think a lot of people can just appreciate. Because I mean, if that one egg goes really well, great. But if it doesn't, well, now you got egg on your face, right? So nobody wants that. So thank you for laying out the basics. I don't think that's too much for people to chew on. Let's get into your second point in your survival guide, okay? And this is to start investing as much as you can and as early as you can as possible. This one I feel like might be a little bit unintuitive to people, because I think a lot of people would just be thinking, well, I'll just wait until I'm older when I have more money. Why do you think it's so important to get going with it as soon as possible?
Absolutely. It's super important. Investing the youngest you can is one of the best free advantages you can have. Every time I don't want to invest, I remind myself that every $1 invested before the age of 25 is roughly equal to $88 by 65, assuming an average 10% annual return. But if I just wait until I'm 30 instead of before 25, it falls to $23. That's wild. Do not wait until you're older and quote unquote have more money, because what's ironic is the money that you actually have now is more money because of compound interest. The amount of money earned might kind of be small at first, but it grows exponentially over long term because of compound interest.
Yeah, I mean, compound interest, tongue in cheek, it's called like the eighth wonder of the world. And this graph that we had up on screen there that you were speaking to is a really powerful one that I hadn't come across before. You sort of put it on my radar, but I think it's a really interesting way of looking at things and putting some urgency behind things. That graph assumes a 10% annual rate of return, which is the historical market average over like 100 years for the S&P 500. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I think it's a pretty long stretch of time to give us a lot of evidence that, like, hey, maybe it'll be something in that ballpark, hopefully, fingers crossed. But compound interest, incredible thing. And we actually have another chart, too, that looks at things the other way with compound interest. And it just shows, like, as you were saying, the amounts of money are little at first, but all of a sudden, look towards the end of that chart, there gets to be a point after you've invested where your money's making more money than you're making, like working for it. And like that just becomes like really intoxicating. So like you say, the sooner that you can get going, the earlier. That said, I think a lot of people would say, well, look, I'm young. Maybe I have a part-time job. I don't have a lot of money. So how much money do you think somebody actually needs to start investing?
That's a great question. In my opinion, I actually think you need zero because the first step is to open an account, and that can actually be quite overwhelming. The first step is opening an account, and most brokerages don't have a minimum. But let's say you've already done that. I say try to get about $100, or basically however much it takes you to buy your first share of a stock or a fund or ETF. And you can absolutely find investments for under $100. But if you're looking for a goal to have in your savings before you find exactly what you're going to buy, I'd say 100 is classic and it's a great start. If you have, say, 500 plus waiting to be invested, I think you've waited too long. You should probably just jump in. It's much better to buy something than nothing. I found that setting up an automatic transfer of $100 a month into a mutual fund was really helpful for me when I had a regular income coming in. And that's called paying yourself first. It's a powerful habit that can prevent you from missing out on compound interest by forgetting to invest.
Yeah, paying yourself first is truly like one of the most powerful, in my opinion, habits that an investor can have, because you don't even necessarily have to think about investing. And oftentimes, like, we're all human, right? If we see money in front of us, the temptation is to spend it. If you can automatically, get it out of sight, out of mind, just working for you in your investing accounts, you learn to live on the rest. You don't even notice that it's gone. And then all of a sudden in the background, you've got this like wonderful pile of money hopefully building for you. So I agree, a very powerful habit. Let's get to the third point in your survival guide, and you had sort of teased it a little bit there, and it's talking about investing accounts. This is another point where like there's a little bit of an analysis paralysis that can seep in. There's so many different accounts to choose from. Like, what do I do? How did you kind of navigate that decision process?
So I opened a Roth IRA, which is a rough equivalent of a tax-free savings account in Canada. It basically lets investments inside the account grow tax-free, and you also don't have to pay taxes when you withdraw the money either. And tax-free doesn't sound like oh, so interesting, I just won the lottery, but it very much is, because in my case, I've got anywhere from 10 to 30% taxes being taken out throughout my life. So if I can get a tax break or a tax benefit and hold on to that 10 to 30%, that's a huge amount of money. That's the difference between paying $10,000 in taxes or holding on to that $10,000. And then I chose a Roth IRA because the tax benefits are specifically good for retirement, and I'm young, so that's where I'm using my compound interest advantage.
Yeah, the TFSA here in Canada, like you say, like the Roth IRA, like it's truly like a powerful account, because the last thing anybody wants to think about is taxes when you're sort of managing your money, and you just want to put money away and for whatever future goal you may have. But you can almost think about it like when you avoid taxation when you take your money out as like almost like a free return of whatever the tax rate you would have paid had you not had this tax-free advantage. So a really powerful account here in Canada, TFSA. A great place for beginners to start. Let's get to your fourth point in your survival guide. And we're running through this really fast. This is fantastic. It's to keep investing simple and straightforward. I think, in popular culture, we often see, these finance bros, doing complex day trading strategies and stuff like that. And I think that might be the perception for the uninitiated, that that's what you need to do to be a good investor. You don't feel that that's the case, though. Why is that?
Yeah, absolutely not. What's really interesting about the average investor assuming they need a complex plan to be good at investing is that complexity hasn't historically led to better results, which is why I stick with simple and consistent, because it's easier. And looking back, it has always had a better return than complex strategies. Consider that 90% of all US stocks funds tracking large companies underperform the S&P 500 index. So even professionals who are trying to outperform the stock market for a living generally fail to do so over a long time horizon. So simple, consistent, and I don't touch it.
Yeah, and actually we have a chart that illustrates this as well. It's in honor of you and the American coming to us from Chicago. I use the U.S. as an example, but it's also true in Canada, where roughly 90% of the funds that are trying to beat those passive indexes fail to do so over 15 years, which is like a really powerful stat in my mind. It's almost like the perfect example of doing less is sometimes doing more in a lot of ways. And that makes it, I think, really comforting for beginners, because you're like, hey, look, I don't have to be a pro. I don't have to be some kind of, market savant or something like that to figure this out, right? I just got to be consistent. That's the most important thing. So I'm curious, like you sort of touched on it a little bit there. You like to, go the ETF route, but like, what's your approach to keeping things simple, straightforward, easy to manage?
Yeah. I buy a few index ETFs and mutual funds that have very broad categories. So think like the global stock market or a lot of tech companies, some real estate ETFs, and then I regularly contribute money to those and I buy more of them when I can. And this is known as passive index investing. These index funds generally carry very inexpensive fees and don't require me to do extensive research because the investments are so diversified themselves. So I keep it simple by buying low risk, diversified, and then I continue to add to those investments.
Now, there's a bajillion and one investments out there. There's a ton of index funds that you could potentially invest in too. Again, this is another point where I can see some people just getting analysis paralysis, and it's like, I don't know which one to choose. Like, how did you figure out which one to choose out of all these options out there?
That's so true. There are so many. Did you actually know that there are more ETFs than individual stocks on the market?
It's a crazy stat. Like that's a recent phenomenon, but it just continues to go up and up and up and up.
Like, yeah, right. Like there's so many. When I was deciding what to invest in and then continue to buy, I was in the mindset of like low risk, reliable return. So overall world stock market and then broad sectors that were specific. So I personally hold a small handful of mutual funds and ETFs. One covers the entire global stock market. One covers the S&P 500, which is the 500 largest companies in the US. One is some real estate, and then one covers technology stocks. It's okay to pick areas of focus that you understand or believe in, but just remember to be very diversified overall.
Yeah, I think another thing too that might also be helpful for newbies to keep in mind is that, I mean, certainly always look into whatever fund you're thinking about investing in, but for a lot of these ones that are very diversified, there's not actually that much difference in a lot of cases between them. So, you know, whether you choose Coke or Pepsi, so to speak, it doesn't really matter that much. They're both delicious. In any case, there's a strategy out there that a lot of younger investors in particular and long-term investors have started to follow. And it basically is some kind of variation of something called S&P 500 and chill, where basically you're just holding one index fund that tracks the S&P 500, the 500 largest US companies, and you just regularly contribute to it. That's it. Do you think that that is all that a Gen Z investor needs, or do you need a little bit more complexity than that? What's your take?
For a Gen Zer, that's really not a bad plan, since Gen Zers typically have a very long time horizon. We're not retiring anytime soon or hopefully unable to work anytime soon. So holding on to and buying a diversified investment like the S&P 500, it's a classic low-risk choice. The S&P 500 generally reflects the entire stock market, so if the stock market does have a downturn, we as Gen Zers have time to wait for it to recover because we're not selling our investments anytime soon. And of course, there's definitely a small chance that the market is super bad for a very long period of time, but that would be very unusual. And then at that point, I tell myself that everyone's in the same position as me. That said, it's definitely a good idea to diversify more later in life as your focus shifts from building your investments to preserving your portfolio.
So I'm curious in your case, like why did you not just go like the S&P 500 and chill route? Because you have multiple ETFs that you're holding. Why did you make that decision?
That's a great question. You can probably tell through my investments that I am very low risk, risk adverse. So I am almost partial to buying simply S&P world stock market. And so those other investments that I have, although they are very similar and reliable, investments, I was like, all right, let's do something out of my comfort zone. Like I don't totally understand this ETF that I'm buying that has a bunch of tech stocks in it, but like let me do this. Let me just get out of my comfort zone. I already have a couple thousand in the global stock market and the S&P 500. So those were relatively safe investments and low risk, but that was me getting outside of my comfort zone. Right.
Okay. And so you had sort of the old reliable as the core, and then you sort of reach out to like a few other things, to take a little bit more risk. I think that's a really smart approach that a lot of investors follow. They call it core and satellite approach. I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, what you're talking about when you say you're a low risk investor, kind of speaks to the fifth point in your survival guide, and that's the emotional aspect of investing. And you feel that investors should try to, as much as possible, keep their emotions out of their decisions. How can our emotions be our own worst enemies?
Absolutely. Emotions interfere with your financial plan because you will stop looking at your investments objectively. And there are a ton of negative stories in the media that are designed to generate engagement from your emotional reaction, like fear or anxiety. But I want us to clock that. Generate engagement, not share information, not educate you. They want your attention under any circumstance, and the negative emotions tend to keep us more on our phones. So I personally even find whenever my safety in the sense of like rent or retirement, someone says could be threatened, I start searching to figure out if I need to sell, completely change my plan, which is a terrible idea. And the point of the matter is money is emotional. We tend to think it's not, but it most definitely is emotional. And we're just gonna have these emotions. But knowing that now will help us as Gen Zers be better investors, because then we won't act irrationally in the heat of the moment. I say make a plan and stick with the plan, but recognize that you're going to be emotional about it because money is highly emotional.
Yeah, sometimes it's almost helpful to know less and keep up less with like market news. I think especially as like someone who's not looking to get really hardcore about it, because you're right. The headlines do sort of bias towards negativity and sensationalism to some extent. So it can kind of give you a skewed, warped perception of what the world is actually like. So in any case, I think one of the big emotions, of course, many investors are going to contend with, particularly newbies, is this fear of losing money in the stock market. Like let's say the stock market crashes or something like that. For Gen Zers, you don't think that that's necessarily as big of a concern, not really something that they have to worry about a ton. Why do you feel that way?
Yeah, speaking to your point a little bit before, is when I first invested, I didn't look at my portfolio because I knew I was going to have an emotional reaction to it. The people around me, I had really helpful mentors and peers. They were just like, buy it. You already know what it is. It's the S&P 500. Don't look at it because you will get scared. And there's absolutely that fear of losing money. And my first month of investing, my portfolio actually went into the negatives at negative 244, which at the time was 8% of my portfolio. So when I did take a little peek there, I was definitely anxious, but luckily I have a mentor who says the classic line, right? Time in the market beats timing the market. And I think that's a classic line that we should all repeat to ourselves. And my portfolio ended up going back up, and I've never had a negative again. And what I learned as a young person is that you can largely ignore market volatility because as Gen Zers, we're not planning on selling our investments for a very long time. Therefore, it's a little inconsequential whether the investments go up or down in price. Also, keep in mind that it always seems like there's some crisis that's going on that's going to cause the next big market crash, and that they will always tell you this time is different, but it very rarely is. I've experienced plenty of TikTok scare that the market is crashing and you drop everything and sell, but history has shown that time in the market beats timing the market. And in fact, if you try to avoid the market crashes by selling investments, that often leads to investors missing out on some of the best performing days that can drive a lot of your returns.
Yeah, it is kind of like a curious quirk of the market that some of the best days typically follow some of the worst days. So yeah, to your point, like if you're trying to jump in and out and avoid the downside, you might miss the upside, and that will actually hurt your returns a lot more significantly. But that chart that we had up on screen, it just looked at the S&P 500 over time and all the terrible events that have happened along the way. And look, here we are at all-time highs, right? So to your point, it really does beget like some perspective, some long-term perspective when you're investing. You don't necessarily have to care about what's happening tomorrow because you weren't going to sell anyway. In fact, one of the interesting things that we were talking about off camera is that you like to buy when stocks have actually fallen, or the ETFs in your case have fallen. And walk me through your thinking there, because I think that's pretty counterintuitive to people. Why would I want to buy something when it's down?
Right, absolutely. So you want to buy, so we have this understanding that the things that I'm invested in, say like the S&P 500, have a net growth over time kind of averaged out. So if it falls and then someone like me buys it, it's very likely to meet back up there and net out. But buying at a lower price means that I then have a higher return.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. They call it expected returns. Like obviously, if you pay less for something, you have more room for it to go up. Whereas if you paid more for it, things have to go really well for you to make money on it. That's a really good point. And the other upshot too is that you're going to be able to buy more units or shares of your ETFs, stocks, what have you, because it costs less. So it's almost like getting something on sale, like a discount, right? And who doesn't like a good sale, right? One last point I want to ask you about is another emotion that's very common, and that's the fear of missing out. I think this is a huge one, especially in like the social media era that we live in. You will see, hundreds of stories online about people getting some incredible returns off some weirdo cryptocurrency or some kind of meme stock or something like that. And like, I know for myself, I'm also a humble index investor like you. Sometimes you see that stuff and you're like, gee, I wish I was making that money. Like maybe I should deviate from my plan. And I'm curious how you would sort of talk to your peers, other Gen Z investors starting out, and convince them that boring can be beautiful. You don't have to reach for all the crazy stuff. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I like to think of it this way. Should I take the path that 99% of people become millionaires on that takes a little longer? Or should I take the path that I have a less than 1% chance of becoming a millionaire right now? Slow and steady wins the race. I prefer stable and consistent investments that I can be reasonably confident will perform over the long term. If you look at the historical track record of diversified index funds, they've worked over and over again. I'm not trying to become super rich with risky investments because it's much, much more likely that I'll just lose all my money. But, when the anxiety about money rises up, as it does for many of us Gen Zers, maybe it's that I don't have enough money, or maybe someone else on social media is way ahead of me. I like to just take a breath, remind myself that I'm happy. I like my life. I eat good food. I have good friends. I'm healthy. Would I like to have 6 figures invested right now? Yes, definitely. But I'm okay, right? So to the Gen Zers listening, next time you're stressing about money, breathe and remind yourself that in this moment right now, you are okay. And I also like to think that my fear or jealousy or whatever is causing me stress in that moment is information. If I'm jealous of this social media guru who has a bigger portfolio than me, it's my job to clock that is information, that I'm jealous. And so now it's my job to turn that into a goal. Or if I get anxious listening to a finance bro talk with a lot of jargon and information that I don't understand, it's information for me now that I want to learn those terms.
I think, Jacey, you are like wise beyond your years here because you've got this wonderful perspective on life. I think it will serve you very well. We appreciate you walking us through your survival guide for new Gen Z investors. Some great food for thought here. And of course, we have a lot more to get to, including our live viewer Q&A. It's coming up in just a few minutes. So if you haven't got your questions in for Jacey, make sure you do. We're going to take as many as we can. First, though, I want to bring in my colleague, Caitlin Cormier, because she's going to give us a closer look at how new investors can get started making their first investments on the TD Easy Trade platform. Caitlin, welcome to the show. Lovely to have you as always. Jacey and I were talking about index funds as a potential thing to consider. So can you clue us in, like how can investors find index funds on Easy Trade?
Okay, so I actually have our web broker platform up today, but the good news about the web broker platform is there are still a lot of free ETFs that can be purchased through this platform. So Easy Trade is the one that's on the app that we use, but web broker can be used as well. So let's just hop into web broker quickly here and look at our screeners tool. So this tool here, it can be relatively simple. We don't have to overcomplicate it. I've come here just by clicking on research under tools and screeners. And then I go ahead and click this button that says create custom screen. All this is doing is it's taking all the different ETFs that are out there on the market and it's filtering them down. You can kind of think of them like a little funnel. They're getting rid of everything you don't want and just keeping the types of investments you're looking for. So for example, if I were to click on the index, then I want to click to add that and say I'm only looking for index funds. If I'm looking for a particular type of fund, then I can go ahead and click fund category. And then I can go through here and say like, if I'm looking for example, US equity or Canadian equity, like stocks, then I could go ahead and click there. And it's going to tell me that I'm going to go ahead and just choose ETFs. There's 42 ETFs that match index funds in Canada. And then I can go in and see what those index funds look like. So this is going to show me that list. It's going to show me the names of these funds. And I can do a little bit further research here to see what's available. If you're looking for more simple though, like Rob, exactly what you just said is that the TD ETFs are what show up on the Easy Trade app. So it's actually going to give you less decision anxiety because you're going to see less options for ETFs to get into. So both platforms will work for finding these investments. But if you want to kind of get a little bit more, then you can come into WebBroker and see all the different index funds there.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of ETFs to choose from depending on what you want. But if you want simple index funds, like they're all pretty much the same flavor. So it's a great place to start. And of course, WebBroker has a nice little comparison tool that you can put them side by side and you'll see well, they're really not that different after all. So there you go. In any case, Caitlin, we got to run, but thank you for showing us that. That was Caitlin Cormier, TD's Senior Client Education Instructor. Appreciate you as always, Caitlin, joining us. All right, let's get to our live Q&A. Jacey, are you ready to hear what our viewers want to know more about?
I am.
All right, let's get to our first question. What do we got on tap here? We have Jaden. Jaden is asking, what's the best first step if I want to get started? So Jacey, you spoke a little bit about your survival guide and how you did it, but if you were to boil it down to the first step, the very first step you can take to get going, what would you say?
Figure out what account is for you. I'm assuming the person asking this question is around my age, a Gen Zer. So figure out the account that you want to open. Like I said earlier, ask the trusted mentors around you, maybe older siblings, maybe a parent, what brokerage do they like to use, and then figure out the account. And what I would recommend is an account that benefits you for retirement because we have that compound interest advantage.
Yeah, I think a lot of it too, like in your case, you're sort of saving for retirement. It really does depend on your goal, though. I mean, like there's certain accounts that are a little bit more geared towards, for example, here in Canada, saving for your first home. We have something called the First Home Savings Account, FHSA. So like if you know that that's your goal and that's what you're focused on singularly, then maybe that's the option. But to your point, yeah, choosing the investing account is sort of the first step in the process. So good perspective there. Let's get to our next question then. Let's see what else we have on tap. We have Jordan asking a question. What's one investing tip you wish you had learned earlier that would have saved you from problems later on? Oh, this is a good question. What do you think?
Ooh, I wish that I had found people who look like me and talk like me on social media before I started investing. When I started investing, I was just listening to kind of the people around me, my teachers. But I wish that I had found people on social media that look like me, talk like me, use jargon that I understand. That would have made it so much easier. Now, of course, I see the Gen Zers and the women, and I'm friends with them on social media who talk about financial literacy. And that's also why I think it's so important that I talk about financial literacy, because I like talking about it. And then people that look like me go, oh, I can do this too. Like there's a young woman doing this. There's a spot for me at this table.
Are there any, I'm going to put you on the spot here, but are there any particular content creators that you really like?
Oh my goodness. Yes. Jess Inskip. She is amazing. She's the host of a podcast called Market Make Her. Highly recommend. Jess Inskip was the first woman on Fidelity's active trader desk. And I did a mini series on her podcast called Finance Sis, S-I-S as in sister. Really fun. She has had, I want to say 5-10 license, and she knows what she's talking about it. And I just love the way that she's very personable, and she's like herself. She talks a lot about her interests as well as the education, and her TikToks are 10 out of 10.
I totally agree. Jess Inskip is amazing. So amazing that we had her on our TD Active Trader Live program just last week. An incredible guest, probably knows more about investing and probably has forgotten more about investing, frankly, than I'll ever know. So yeah, a great follow. Definitely check out that episode too if you want to see more conversations with Jess Inskip as well. Let's get to our next question then. We have Dan asking a question. I'm living paycheck to paycheck and every month feels tight. And I think this is a relatable scenario for a lot of people. What can I do if I can't even spare $1 to invest right now? What would you say, Jacey?
That is a great question. That's a really hard question because I think that it probably starts with your personal understanding of money. And that's what has to do with the first question that I talked about. I was really lucky to have a conviction to be like, money will not be the barrier to entry for me. And so I got to get really money smart. I think that I would recommend a book called The Psychology of Money, and it's how different generations and different people react to money. And I think that that would be the starting point for you if you fiscally and like mathematically can't do it right now. Understand your mindset and your emotions to money.
Yeah, I think that's some good food for thought as well. I think maybe another thing too, if I could humbly suggest something, might be to try to quantify things through a budget. See where all the money is going, because if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So I think that might be a good starting point for you as well, Dan. Try to take a little bit of accounting of like where all your money's going. You might surprise yourself. Maybe there is a little bit of money that you could squeeze out. And like Jacey and I were talking about, you don't need a lot to start. So perhaps that's something. And of course, saving up for maybe an emergency fund or something like that, if you're really living paycheck to paycheck, is also a good thing to do, just so you're ready in case of emergency. Let's get to our next question. This one coming to us from Amy. Amy wants to know, how can I motivate Gen Zs, like my niece, to invest when they seem disengaged, especially when small hurdles like opening an account cause them to give up?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I think that there's a lot of Gen Z doomerism mindset that really takes over. And I think just talking with your niece about things that you understand and that you know are safe, and like the brokerage that you use or the education that you learned investing through, like the podcasts or books, and just sharing them with her. And I totally understand the doomerism mindset. It's part of being a teenager, I think. But I think that you also will get through to her.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you make. It is part of the coming of age process as well. I think maybe some food for thought as well too, if I was to offer some, would be that with how expensive everything is in life these days, it's almost an imperative to get investing just to keep up with it all, right? So the sooner you can start, like we were talking about, hopefully you can get ahead of that a little bit, at least in some sense. But yeah, it's tough out there, no question about it. Let's move on to our next question. This one coming to us from Jordan as well. What's a challenge you think Gen Z investors face that older generations didn't?
I think that Gen Z investors are very overloaded with information. We are told everything about every sector of the finance world, about every country. We can access any kind of ETF that we could possibly want to invest in. So I think that we really struggle a lot with information overload, similarly to just opening an account, right? There's so many options, and there's so many like decent options as well. So it's hard, and I think that we get stopped by this fear that we're making a wrong decision. And I feel like there are a lot of good decisions, and there might be some slightly better decisions depending on like your specific situation. But I just really push people to just start, just open an account, just start understanding ticker symbols, just little stuff.
I think that's a good point about like the analysis paralysis of it all, and just the information overload. It's always in our face all the time, and that's why sometimes just to disconnect a little bit can be really helpful. Figure out the basics that you need to know, and then just kind of let it ride a little bit. I think that can be helpful for a lot of people. The flip side is that with all that information, you can potentially do great things with that information if you get invested, but to start, just keep it simple, I think, like you were saying earlier. Great point. Let's get to our next question. This one from Sergey, and actually several viewers are also asking this. Isn't the S&P 500 index really tech heavy right now? How should somebody who's worried about volatility think about investing in it? So this is a good point. There is a very heavy weighting in tech right now. I think one of the highest historically, if I'm correct, in the S&P 500 right now. Is that a concern for you, Jacey? How do you think people can navigate that?
That's an absolutely fair concern. So there's something called an equal weight S&P 500. So it sounds like these viewers understand that the S&P 500 is not weighted equally between the companies. So you can buy, if you want to invest in the S&P 500, which is what I'm gathering from this question, you can buy something called an equal weight one. And that kind of solves it, evens it out a little bit. But you are correct, it's very tech heavy.
Yeah, equal weight, basically, I'm going to try to put it in plain language for myself too here, is just that, let's say there's 8 sectors in the economy. it's just equally investing in each one of those, the companies that fit within those categories. So yeah, it kind of evens out that tech heaviness. That's a really good suggestion for those who are concerned about that. Okay, that's all the time we have for our Q&A, Jacey. You handled all those questions like a total pro. Look at you. Thank you so much for doing that. And of course, for sharing your survival guide for Gen Z investors. I think this was really inspirational stuff. I'm hoping that it gets some people, galvanized to get started with their own investing journey as you have and get going. So thank you so much for joining us and filling us in.
Yes, thank you for having me on.
We'll have to have you back again soon. It was a pleasure. And of course, for those in our audience, thank you for tuning in as always. Make sure you check out next week's episode. We've got one of the OGs of dividend investing, Ian Lopich from PPC Ian on YouTube. He is going to be sharing some of the tactics and habits that have helped him get really close to an early retirement that he can live on and enjoy his life. So we're going to dive into some of the things that he's doing that have propelled him to success. That's all the time we have for this edition of the show. From everyone at Inside Investing, thanks again for watching. We'll see you all next time.
Have more questions? Check out the links to the right and in the description below.